is nothing to beat compassion.
I'm in your hands. Just cue me when I need to be live.
Okay. They will cue you.
Thank you.
Definitely. Yeah. Thank you. Hello.
Donato Francesco Mattera. My Tswana name is Munapule Lebake. Ek is hier gebore in 1935. Toe is het nog Western Native Township. At the age of 6 years, 3 months op die trein met 'n groot bord hierso. Ek is hier gebore
We need
in
to
1935. Toe is het nog Western.
we just like our ears are the to the Claremont Harvest Time Dome in our communities from Westbury and surrounding areas who are joining us live via YouTube. I only wish that we could have all been together today. I'd like to doff my cap to our esteemed patron, Dr. Donato Francesco Mattera, and our dynamic keynote speaker, the young man, otherwise known as Professor Jonathan Jansen. I'll introduce our panelists and speakers later, but thank you so much for accepting the invitation. It is a profound privilege for me to have been invited to officiate on this glorious day. I'm a broadcaster and an author. My name is Iman Repetti. You may catch me lurking in the shadows and in the news occasionally, if you care to check out where I am. But today represents the first. It is the first annual lecture dedicated to the work, the life, and most importantly, the legacy impact of a man whose words have served as a balm to the wounded, a clarion call to the disaffected, a conscience to the apathetic, and bouquets of light in the darkness. And light could not be needed more as our country finds itself sometimes navigating by touch, enveloped in a shroud of corruption, sadness, and need. And even though this was written a long time ago, it is apt for a moment such as this. Deja vu, all over again. They think us happy because we hide our anguish in song, stamp our shackled feet until red drips from the cracks. They smile, and we smile, We only smile because they smile and they think us happy. Let us remove our masks of artificial merriment, reveal the wrinkles of our quiet anger, wash the clay from our bodies, and let them see the scars. Perhaps they know, perhaps they know not, but damn it, they must be told. We have had enough. Thank you to the Don Mattera Legacy Foundation and the support from the Gautrain Management Agency for this love letter to a globally acclaimed author, poet, journalist, humanitarian, and children's rights activist. Thank you to the communities of people who've been affected, provoked, and changed through his work for accepting the invitation to join us in this moment. We are marking a legacy, and long may it flourish and continue to catalyze change. The theme is The Child in 2030, and throughout our program today, you will hear more about the work that is done, the work that is still to be done with our partners in the holy task of making sure that our children are kept safe. So I invite all of you to feel very welcome on this momentous day. And on that note, let me open the way for the chair of the Don Mattera Legacy Foundation, Jenny Jefter.
Good afternoon, honored guests gathered here today at the Radisson, in Sandton, our guests at the Harvest Time Dome, where this event is being streamed live, and to all of you joining us from around the world online. Welcome to the inaugural Don Mattera lecture. The Don Mattera Legacy Foundation was the brainchild of the late Dr. Leonard Martin, who identified a number of individuals who he believed shared the same vision he had over the past 2 years, and we have all been impacted by the events of the past 2 years. And the fact that we are gathered here in person in this manner is in itself a huge privilege and a blessing. We are a non-profit organization and could never host an event like this without the generosity of others. So to all who have contributed to this event, whether in kind or in substance, we acknowledge you. However, it would be remiss of me not to acknowledge the Gautrain Management Agency. They have generously sponsored us and partnered with us, and in particular, I have to acknowledge the late Dr. Ingrid Jensen, who shared our vision in making our dream a reality. We are deeply indebted, Barbara, to you and your team, and who have supported us in the planning and the organization of this event. Thank you very much. Don, today is your day. You are the reason why we are here today. We honor you, we pay tribute to you, and we celebrate you. We celebrate you for leading us and leading the way for us, paving the way for us. We thank you for teaching, your direction, your instruction, your guidance. We thank you for your courage, your inspiration, and for being the embodiment of true humanity. We honor you for being that voice to the voiceless, and for being an advocate for the rights of all, including children. We are so enormously privileged to have you present here with us today. You are the reason we are gathered here today, and we want to say to you, we are because you are. It was Cicero who said the following: to be ignorant of what occurred before you were born is to remain always a child. For what is the worth of human life unless it is woven into the life of our ancestors by the records of history? So we as human beings cannot go forward unless we know where we come from. The focus of our lecture this year is the child, and this theme finds its roots in Don Mattera's deep value of compassion for the child and his concern for the future well-being of the child amidst a world that is constantly in turmoil. We thank our keynote speaker and our panelists who have so generously accepted our invitation to take the opportunity to expand on this theme and briefly share their insights and their perspectives with us today. It is our intention to host this lecture annually, and this would be regarded as our signature event. Honored guests, I now invite you to sit back, to relax, and enjoy this inaugural lecture with us. I thank you.
Thanks so much for that, Jenny. I want to introduce our next guest. As Jenny said, without whose generosity we could not be sitting in the heights of Sandton, darling. So here we are today, and I want to welcome Dr. Barbara Jensen-Forster, who is with the Gauteng Management Agency. She is the Senior Executive Manager for Communication and Marketing. Feel very welcome, Barbara.
When the first sun rose, it found us waiting, long before others came to these hills. Our footsteps shaped the landscape, tamed the buffalo and the gemsbok. We rode the wind. We silenced the hurricane. Look at us. We have been here before. I cannot start this event with any other one's words but Tata Don's words. I cannot remember when this poem became part of my consciousness. It had been for so long that it had become part of my DNA. I cannot write, but I can take some photos. I just came back from the Masai Mara, and every morning the sun finds me waiting for it. And every time that I dawn, I press down my shutter. These words, when the first sun rose, it found us waiting, goes through my head. I yet have to take the ideal shot, that final shot when I can put down my camera and say, this is it. This photo, do your words justice. Hopefully it won't come too soon, because I still need to do a lot of travels into the womb of Africa. But this has been your words, and I hope some of my photos do it justice. But as Iman said, Ingrid, one of my colleagues, and also my sister, started this process with the Don Mattera Legacy Foundation. And sorry for that, for my emotion, because I'm standing in for her today. She cannot be here. She passed away of COVID in June last year. And Ingrid used to do this to me. And she would come and stand in my doorway at the office and say, Barbara, in that tone of voice that I know would cost me money in the end of that conversation. And I would normally say no. And she said, there's something I would like to do, or Gautrain have to do with the Don Mattera Foundation. And I said yes, without hesitation, without her telling me what this is going to be. And we started the long walk with them. This event has been arranged so many times and had been cancelled so many times due to the COVID pandemic. All of us sitting here, lives had been changed due to COVID. Whilst Ingrid, just after Ingrid passed, and my mom passed 48 hours later, blessed for him to be with us today. When Ingrid passed, it took some, it was in the height of COVID, the COVID passing, the height of the third wave. It took some time before I could get their ashes, and took them to Paternoster, our family holiday home, to take their ashes to the sea. And I had a bunch, about 60 proteas that we put into the sea. And there was a tremendous storm that night. And one perfect protea washed out during the night. And I took that as Ingrid's way of saying to me, everything is going to be okay. And I had the protea tattooed on my wrist. And there's someone put a protea in the front. And I truly believe that Ingrid is here today, Tata Don, that she's with us. And I found a poem you wrote about the protea. It's not a flower. It's a dome of fluttering flags, tombs of Afrikaner relics, and monuments of ox wagon, dipped in blood. It's the flight of the black man's spear, flung in hostile fear of lost possession, conquered manhood and broken pride. It is the tears of my bonded people, falling on Pretoria's marble steps, the victims of subjugation. The protea can never be a flower, not while the soul of South Africa struggles to be set free. I find it so incredible how I hated the protea. I hated every symbol of the apartheid regime. But I found how incredible it is, how the protea became the bond between me and Ingrid. And I just found it incredible how this poem surfaced while I was reading your poems again. I want to leave you with the last poem that I want to read of Tata Don. And then I want you to leave him with Tata Madiba and with the Arch, with Mother Teresa and all those, and with Gandhi, all those great people. It's the title is And Yet. I've known silences, long and deep as death, where the mind questioned the logic of my frailty. In the imminence of my destruction, by men ruled and ravaged by power lust, I've known deep silences, when thoughts like angry waves beat against the shores of my mind, revealing the scars of brutal memories and the murder of my manhood. And yet, I cannot hate. Try as I want to, I cannot hate. Why?
Barbara, how beautiful. And please accept all of our condolences on the loss of two of your jewels, really. I'm so sorry to hear that. We didn't know. And thank you for sharing so beautifully and so deeply. Really appreciate you. I want to introduce our moderator for today, somebody who's going to curate this conversation. I'm looking forward to it so much. She is an award-winning veteran journalist, associate editor of the Daily Maverick. She's also been at the helm of both the Mail and Guardian and the City Press. She's also a colleague, but I call her my sister and friend, and sometimes we share tips about clothing and makeup. You threatened our makeup today, Barbara. I spent 3 hours putting this face on, and I was going to cry. Her name is Ferial Hafaji, ladies and gentlemen. Please give her a warm welcome.
Thank you, lovely Iman. Assalamu alaikum, Don Mattera and gathered guests. Peace be upon you all. It's wonderful to be with you, and I hope that your dear sister and mom are resting in peace, Barbara, and thank you for sharing your story with us. So before we get going, I am to say how I know Don. So I grew up in Westbury, Bosmont and New Clare, across those 3 suburbs, and I was perplexed by our oppression and by apartheid. And I remember just before the tricameral parliament was launching, coming into being, I attended a play by Don Mattera at a community or a church hall in Westbury. And the words that stuck with me for helping to narrate and navigate that world, because it came about at a time where black people were being co-opted into the apartheid project, and where black and colored policemen, Indian as well, were the worst oppressors of our students and our people. And I remember that play where you said the poem, my one-time brother, my one-time friend, and those words were so material to me. Your words, your poetry, your writing taught me about the liberating force of words to narrate our worlds at the time, because they were appalling worlds for which you couldn't explain them very well. And also, more importantly, the power of words to press for a better world, because often that was all that we had at our disposal. Obviously, later, you were an associate editor of training at the Weekly Mail, and you trained a generation of us, this grand man, this Donato Francesco Mattera, this Umaruddin Mattera, would walk around in that newsroom with a scarf just like this one, I remember so well. And I suppose, as I've thought about you, it was less that you taught us verbs or nouns or typing. That was somebody else's job. But what was most important is that you taught us to see ourselves differently in the world and to walk differently in the world, to walk with confidence, to stake a place and to take a place. And for that, many of us must thank you very, very deeply. So Professor Jonathan Jansen is our keynote speaker today. We all know him very well. He is South Africa's educationist extraordinaire. He is an ambassador for children. He is a fine public intellectual with a finger to the pulse and a Twitter timeline that you absolutely must read if you don't already. He's a distinguished professor of education at Stellenbosch. He is the president of the Academy of Social Sciences, where he's doing marvelous work, and he is the previous and shape-shifting vice-chancellor of the University of the Free State, a storied and awarded son of the soil. We very much look forward to hearing what you have to say to us today, Prof. Jonathan Jansen. Are you there? Can you hear?
Hi, Ferial. Let me just check whether you can hear me.
We can hear you beautifully.
Fantastic. Oh my word, two of my heroes on one stage, Ferial and Iman. What amazing people. And what an honor to deliver the inaugural Don Mattera lecture today. I so wish I could have been there with you physically. The title of my talk, which I thought about a lot in the case of Bradon, is Unbowed and Unbought. And that, of course, is drawn from one of my favorite quotations by the scholar intellectual Cornel West, Unbowed and Unbought. And what I want to talk about very briefly is what Don Mattera teaches us in a broken country. Now, when I first met Don Mattera, it was at the launch of my very first book, an edited volume called Knowledge and Power in South Africa. The publisher at the time was Scoteville Publishers, and I think Don was one of the directors. But what I remember as a young academic from that special evening in Braamfontein was the felt presence of this formidable man and how respected and loved he was in that assembly of people in the early 90s. I knew then what I'd already suspected from his writings, that this was a very special human being. And for that reason, among others, it is an incredible honor to be able to honor the great Don Mattera. Now, I cannot say his names with that wonderful Italian accent of Iman, but Donato Francisco Mattera is a man, it seems to me, who defies classification. And that is a very difficult thing to say in whatever that means, and his mother African. How is it that you could have in one person a violent gangster who also achieved the Peace Prize of the World Health Organization in 1997? How do you have an activist who received banning orders under one regime and national orders under another regime? For those of you who are curious about the latter, it was the Order of Ikamanga in silver in 1997. Here you have a man who fights with sharp knives at one point, and then with sharp words at another point, as a poet, as a writer, as a journalist, as a playwright. Here you have a man who is a Muslim, but the product of a Catholic convent school, and who in one of his poems quotes from Christian hymns such memorable lines as "Fast falls the eventide," and "When other helpers fail." For the curious, these are words from Abide With Me, a very famous Christian hymn, which was composed by a Scottish Anglican in 1861. Here you have a man who once destroyed lives and now has become one of the most iconic community builders of our times. And finally, here you have a man who joined the National Forum because he believed the UDF was not racially inclusive. Don, you'll have to help me understand that one at some point, and so on. But clearly, a man who defies classification. What is the point of this, of what I've said so far? That in his life and in his learning, and indeed in his loves, Don demonstrate what it really does mean to be a citizen in a democracy, or as my friend John Samuel puts it, he teaches us through his life the habits of democracy. What does that mean? It means that you cannot and should not be defined by origins, by who your parents were or where they came from. It means not allowing others to define who you are. It means not to be trapped in some given identity. It also means not to be constrained by political loyalties and not to be defined by your past. At no time in our history is this more important, this kind of commitment, than now. The organized attacks on foreign nationals, especially those from other African countries, is deeply, deeply disturbing. Somebody tweeted the other day, because of my tweets on going after these people, said on Twitter, once we have deported them, we are coming to deport you. And I found that very, very interesting, which is fine, except I'd like to know in advance where you're going to deport me to. That would be most interesting. You make a huge mistake, ladies and gentlemen, if you think this is only about organized gangs like Dudula or frustrated township residents. It is also our government, in a dangerous messaging throughout the civil service, to do head counts of non-South African employees. Worse, in some of our universities, there are now EE policies that make it virtually impossible to hire academic talent from other African countries. Let me just divert here for a second. I don't know a lot, but I know a little bit about universities. The one thing I can tell you, no university becomes great in its development, in its research, in its teaching, when it only relies on the natives, if you know what I mean, on us, on the locals. No university in the world. It is an extremely stupid idea to think that you can build training and development and research institutions without taking the word university seriously, which means the universe of talent, the universe of ideas, the universe of anyway. UCT's new policy on employment is one such example. It's a despicable document, and it should not be allowed to go ahead, to basically cut out. And I ask you to remember what our universities would look like without the Cameroonian Akil Mbembe at Wits University. I ask you to imagine what Stellenbosch University would look like with one of the most highly cited scientists in the world in the agricultural sciences. I ask you to imagine what UCT would look like without Francis Liampo. And so, you would collapse the University of Fort Hare, that I know for a fact, if you had this kind of policy against African nationals in Alice and East London. It is absolutely despicable thinking. And so don't fool yourself to think that this is only about, poor people in the townships. This is also about the civil service. And I'm ashamed to say, it is also about our universities. As I read Don's work, I suspect a very strong Pan-African solidarity that energizes his thinking. Think of this beautiful poem he wrote, Zimbabwean Love Song. Sing and dance, sons, daughters of Zimbabwe. It is the call of a timeless glory and the beat of the native song that beckoned you to struggle on. Nana Zimbabwe, it was your dance of daring feet which set the bush ablaze, made the dying sweet. Sing and dance, daughters and sons of Zimbabwe. It is the rooster that sings of children marching against the wind. The white night is dead. Freedom walks in the sunrise and in the glow of an eternal love song. I'm sending this to all my Zimbabwean friends on Monday. The further point of the discussion so far is of a man who denies classification, is that Don moves around a lot. Like somebody else whom I just had the pleasure of recording a lecture of this kind, Delcy September. He cannot find a place in a single political group. He moves. And this allows the man a fierce independence. In other words, he is, to use old language, his own man. Nor can he be tied down to any particular religious sect, for, as Don himself put it, the highest religion is compassion. I love that. The highest religion is compassion. I fret very often when I look at, where I grew up, which was essentially evangelical faith, and I look at the right-wing evangelicals across the world, particularly in the US at the moment. And I think people have just forgotten the very simple compassions that should guide your life. Things like love your neighbor as yourself. Things like it is, better to give than to receive. Things like, welcoming the stranger. That's actually what all faiths, all Abrahamic faiths are about. And yet we don't live this highest form of religion, which Don calls compassion. He belongs, but he is not owned by any party or any faith or anyone. Now contrast this with the ANC officials in Cape Town, who in the middle of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, went for celebratory drinks at the Russian consulate to commemorate a political relationship. They are owned. They lack independence. They lack integrity. It is they of whom Don Mattera wrote, "They crawled for the colonial crumbs of comfort and sold their souls for money." Contrast that sniveling position with the white comrades that Don Mattera once described, men and women of conscience who sacrificed their days that others might be free. What drives a man who cannot be classified is that conscience lies at the center of his life as a development activist. He said this more than once. My personal mission is to remove pain and suffering from people's lives. This is not supposed to sound profound in democratic South Africa, and yet it is, for it stands in contrast to what so many in our government does. 3 examples quickly: the utter decay and dysfunction of some of our public hospitals, the fact that there are still hundreds of pit-littering toilets in many of our public schools, the demise of almost every one of the SOEs. Why? Not because of a lack of competence, but because of a lack of integrity. It sometimes feels as if our country is in an ethical freefall. And 3 things happened recently that, I'm a very optimistic person like Don. I believe in the children. I believe in our country's future and so on and so forth. But the other day on Twitter, I saw a man running with the robots, the traffic lights, that long yellow pole with the light fixtures still at the other end and all those heavy electrical cables inside. And because it was heavy, he had to come up to breathe every few, minutes. And there the camera was tracking this man stealing the robots. And somebody in one of the captions said, "Steal until there is nothing left to steal." What has become of us? This is not what Don talks about. His mission is the opposite. Ferial, in fact, I think posted something about, I think it was one of her relatives taking a photo from across the road showing people literally uprooting a bus shelter and putting it on the back of the bakkie. So the robots goes, the bus shelter goes. And I work with schools, as you know, a lot. And the other day I went to a school in an area where I grew up, where everything in that school is stolen. That school is as fortified as Paulsmoor prison a few kilometers away. Everything gets stolen. And there's nothing left to steal. And then I realized how depraved we are. The school planted grass just to beautify the place a little bit. Planted a bit of grass in front of the school. Do you know that these gangsters jumped over the fence at night, dug up the grass, and went to probably sell it somewhere? I mean, it's not just that we have a corrupt government that seems to have gone over the edge. It is that ordinary citizens now also believe that, since they steal at the top, I have one life, let me steal at the bottom. This is not to remove pain and suffering from people's lives, Pradon. Didn't you get the memo? Almost steal. The truth is that there are thousands of Don Matteras around the country and in every province that keep this country together. We have more NPOs than all other African countries combined. We have a functional civil society in a highly dysfunctional state. What is special as I move towards a conclusion, what is special about Don Mattera's approach is that he puts children, as you heard before, and in that little track, at the center of his development commitments. And this comes out beautifully in any number of his poems. Under apartheid, he wrote No Children. There are no children in Soweto, Langa, Manenberg. They are dead, jailed, crippled, blinded, tortured. If it stopped there, you have a real picture, but you wouldn't have the complete picture, because in song for this child, those very children give us life. Let this child's bright eyes conquer the cold darkness, shine across the tortured earth. These children, in other words, lift us from despair, as he says in Child, the poem Child. And children again came, pure and cleansing. The children planted a new Africa for a new world. I believe that Don Mattera's deep and broad involvement in the lives of the children of Eldorado Park and elsewhere is driven by this faith that the future restoration of our humanity and the security of our country lie with his youth. It is a vision that I share and one that I support. So finally, how can we thank you today, Don Mattera, for showing us how to live our lives? You write in Child, what do men or women live for, if not to be remembered by their beloved? I want to assure you, Don, this afternoon, that you are well remembered and that you are deeply loved. Thank you.
Another round for Don and for... Thank you very much, Professor Jansen, for that beautiful inaugural lecture on the unbound, the unbought Don Mattera, taking us all the way from our past to this very moment, and making us reflect not only on all that we don't have, but what we do have. Wonderful civil society, very important people doing work in the non-profit sector. Thank you so much, Jonathan. I believe that you have to leave us, so we will say farewell to you as we call on our panelists to join us. Thank you so much. So our panel will now respond to the inaugural lecture by Professor Jonathan Jansen. We are joined by a woman who is always the most